sweetest thing. Honeybee, honeybee, there's no such thing. The sweetest thing. Honeybee, honeybee, there's no such thing. The sweetest thing.
RNZ National UMO, Unknown Mortal Orchestra. The track is Honey Bee. And I've got Nicola Harvey as a guest on Bookmarks today. Movies and TV. Nicola, you tried to get involved in the New Zealand International Film Festival, but it didn't go so well.
I did. I mean, it went okay. I managed to sign up to the app, and I rented the premiere screening of The County, which was the closing night film. And, you know, I was super excited because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to see any of the amazing films that were in the festival. So I tried to do the online version, but I had to watch it on my my phone, which I'm sure the director and the DOP will have been appalled at because the cinematography is exquisite, yet I was watching it on a screen that's about 3 inches. However...
Isn't it frustrating, by the way? Like, I bought a new TV, what was it, earlier this year, like a flash, like a new TV, and I cannot mirror my screen on my phone to the TV. It's the most simple thing in the world, and yet I can't work it out. These things should just work.
I know. I thought the same. And I'm not necessarily a Luddite when it comes to technology. I consider myself, quite good. And no, just 6 hours of trying and it wasn't going to happen. So I resorted to watching it on my phone. And I'm still pleased I did. The story is exquisite in the film. I just wasn't able to appreciate the full scale of filmmaking on offer. But I do, I applaud the film festival for opening it up, especially in this current time, because what it meant for me, being on a farm north of Taupo, I could actually see some of these beautiful films that don't make it to our local cinema all that frequently.
Yeah, you've made the observation that it's not really $30 for a ticket to an arts festival event when you look at everything else that you would have to spend as well.
Yeah, exactly. It turns into quite an expensive mini break. And it's something that I miss about living in Sydney. I went to, a lot of the arts festivals, and winter especially was just jam-packed with them. It, rolled from Vivid into the Sydney Writers' Festival, into the Sydney Film Festival. And for an art lover, it's just an absolute dream. I've just found other things to, entertain me living on the farm, and that's fine. But I do really enjoy the fact that one of the silver linings of COVID, there are very few, but one of them has been so much open access to events that ordinarily I wouldn't be able to attend because of where I'm based. So the New Zealand Writers' Festival was the same. I actually plugged into a lot of their talks as well. Yeah.
And you watched the film Martin Eden, which we've got about a minute left to recommend.
I do. A beautiful film by an Italian filmmaker based on a Jack London, who's an American writer. Story, and it was just a big old juicy film that was very heavy with theory and politics, but it was gorgeously shot, and it was one of those films that I would only ever watch at a film festival. So for that reason alone, I enjoyed the experience on my tiny phone again. And I would thoroughly recommend, if it comes around again, an online film festival on the phone is better than no film festival for me.
Hey, if you want to hear more from Nicola, her podcast is called A Carnivore's Crisis. You'll find it in all the usual places. Congratulations on all that you've achieved, Nicola, and for taking on this challenge of running the farm and the challenge of running a toddler. Nice to chat with you for a little while today.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, great to chat with you. Thank you so much.
That's our Bookmarks guest, Nicola Harvey. We're going to find out more about New Zealand's time on the UN Security Council after 3, and standing by for Judith Collins too.
RNZ News at 3. Good afternoon. Kainwyn Curtis Tierney. Police say non-essential travel in and out of Auckland, including those trying to get to holiday homes, will be turned back. As part of the Alert Level 3 restrictions now in place in the city, there are 8 checkpoints in place at the region's boundaries, with a 9th being set up. Road Policing Team Supervisor, Counties Manukau, Andrew Heath, told Afternoons from a checkpoint south of the city in Bombay that only those on essential business are allowed through.
If you've got essential business or you're an essential worker, you'll be allowed to go on your way. Non-essential travel into Auckland City is not permitted. So if you're travelling from, for example, the Waikato up to see friends in Manurua, you'll be turned around.
Andrew Heath says the checkpoints will remain in place until the regional Level 3 lockdown ends. Hundreds of cars have been queuing outside the Waipareira COVID-19 testing clinic in West Auckland since early this morning. The chief executive of the Waipareira Trust and Māori Party co-leader John Tamihere says there's a heightened sense of anxiety among whānau because the source of the recent confirmed cases is still out there. As the Prime Minister must consider extending the Level 3 lockdown past Friday.
Everyone in New Zealand knows that 3 days gives you nothing, goes nowhere. We all know that from woe to go, it's a 14-day program.
John Tamihere from the Waipareira Trust. Meanwhile, one person has been taken into custody at a Hamilton testing centre. The cold store company where surfaces are being tested for COVID-19 doesn't believe there's a risk to food safety. 2 of Americold's Auckland facilities are closed after a worker, one of the 4 confirmed cases in the same household, tested positive with the virus. Americold's managing director Richard Winnell says it already has protocols in place around both the safety and handling of food.
Because it's temperature controlled, we already operate with gloves and a lot of PPE already. So, again, we don't believe there is a concern around food safety. However, the Ministry of Health will work on that with us, and as our facility is now shut, we will follow with them any protocols to determine any risk on that.
Richard Winnell says he wasn't sure if the company had been supplying to isolation or quarantine facilities. The Reserve Bank has left the benchmark interest rate unchanged at a record low, but significantly increased the size of its bond buying program. The official cash rate has been held at 0.25%, but it's expanded its quantitative easing to $100 billion from $60 billion. The scheme is aimed at keeping money flowing through the financial system, but also keeping a lid on wholesale interest rates. The central bank says it's preparing a further range of measures, such as negative interest rates or buying foreign assets to roll out if needed. It says the prevailing uncertainty is stifling activity and the economic risks are to the downside. Auckland parents are almost through a school day at home after the city moved into Alert Level 3 at midday. Many are also working from home, including Marinda Bruce, who lives in Mount Albert with her family of 6, including 4 children.
Good afternoon, thank you for coming along. I'm joined today by my colleagues, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee, Honourable Paul Goldsmith and Dr Shane Retty. I want to express my disappointment that the country has ended up with this particular community transmission of COVID-19. The disappointment is that it's occurred at all, but this is also an opportunity for the government to show the transparency that they have long talked about. Last evening, around 9:15, which was about half an hour before the scheduled press conference that the Prime Minister had around the community transmission, she telephoned me and advised me that there was now community transmission, or there was believed to be community transmission. They could not find the source of where this had come. And this is, of course, after the 102 days of being free of any community transmission. It is very important at a time like this, particularly when we are 5 weeks out from an election and actually only a few weeks out from the opening of polling booths, that we have the government respecting the pre-election conventions. It is always part of our pre-election convention that a government does not make major decisions without full consultation with the opposition. Clearly advising the Leader of the Opposition, as in myself, just before a public announcement is not consultation. It is also, unfortunately, indicative of what we've seen today. Dr. Shane Retty, who, as you will know, is a medical practitioner, has been trying today to get a meeting and briefing from the Minister of Health, Chris Hipkins, and his officials. He was promised one before 12 today. It is now after 3 o'clock, and phone calls have been made on an almost half-hour basis trying to secure that. It is important to New Zealand that we, and New Zealanders, that we have full transparency that is currently not available. In addition to that, we need to know what is going to happen and what the Prime Minister is proposing for the election date. We are now in the Auckland region, which is a third of the population, in a level 3 lockdown, the rest of the country in level 2 lockdown. It is simply unsustainable to expect there to be a fair and just election at a time when the opposition parties and other parties of government are not free to campaign, but also when people have no certainty as to whether or not they're going to be able to personally cast their vote on election day. I have asked for a meeting today with the Electoral Commission. They are apparently sending me through a letter around about this time instead, and arranging a meeting for tomorrow, which I understand they're also having with the leader of the Labour Party. Again, it is 6 weeks out from an election date. It is only a matter of a few weeks before an election. In a country which has one of the oldest democracies in the world, New Zealanders deserve better than to wonder whether or not they can even vote on election day. We are calling on today the Prime Minister to decide to, as she can, without the need to bring back Parliament to discuss it or to vote on it, to shift out the election date until a date later in November. That would actually ensure whether or not we are actually able to vote properly and to campaign properly before that. If she does not feel able to do so in terms of the COVID level threat at that stage, then the alternative is for her to call back Parliament, and we have today had the decision to dissolve Parliament referred back until Sunday this next week. She could call back Parliament and by a majority, a supermajority, could have the election pushed back into next year. We think that that is probably the better alternative. The fact that we now have a COVID-19 community outbreak that does not seem to have been able to be, say, distinguished from any other outbreak, we can't find the source of it, it tells us that we cannot necessarily be sure that there will be an ability to run a full election on election day this year. So I will be writing to the Prime Minister today outlining that, our concerns, and the fact that we have seen absolutely no transparency today, certainly no information to us on the health issues, and no ability for us to be able to be involved in any consultation on decision making. Happy to take some questions.
Don't we run the risk, though, that if you delay it till, say, November or until next year, we could have another outbreak and then we could have to delay it again? And isn't that undemocratic to give people the right to choose?
Well, it's very hard to have any democratic vote if people can't vote. That is the problem. And I would say to the Prime Minister, it is not the convention in New Zealand pre an election to make decisions on that without full consultation with the opposition. And that is something that, you know, she has my phone number, she can speak to us about that, but it is important to give people some certainty. It would also give some ability to think of alternatives past a postal vote, which frankly sounds utterly ridiculous to anyone who cares about democracy.
How much of this is politics, though? That
in that theory, we could then essentially have to wait for an election until there's a vaccine.
Well, I don't think that that is necessary, but it is important that the government is transparent on this. It has not been transparent so far, and the fact that we are still waiting all day for a briefing on the health situation tells me that they're not prepared to be transparent.
How much of this is politics? How much of this?
Sorry? Well, if we felt that we had any confidence that things will be more transparent and we will have better information, that would not be a bad idea. In fact, that was my view this morning, and my view this morning was that we will see how things go today. The fact that we are still waiting at this time of the afternoon for a briefing from officials to the opposition's health spokesperson, who is a medical doctor, that we would expect some more transparency on that. We're coming to the conclusion that there will not be, it is not going to be, let's say, sustainable for an election day on the day we have.
How much
It's
of...
been less than 24 hours since...
Jenna?
Do you think that the government's timeline stacks up about what they knew when?
Jenna's asking, do we think the government's timeline stacks up for what they knew when? Well, we're hearing a lot of rumours. I'm sure you've heard rumours too. We would like some clarity from the government. Again, transparency. When I spoke to the Prime Minister last evening, I asked her about this, and she said that she didn't know about this until 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Now we've heard that Mr Peters, the Deputy Prime Minister, has been on one news media this morning saying that he knew about it in the morning but got clarification in the afternoon. So I don't know. I would like to have clarity. We would like a timeline. But also the main thing I think that the people of New Zealand want us to do is to ask the questions around their safety, what's happening to their jobs, their economy. I'm sure that you have probably heard from people, as I have, who are desperately worried, not only on the health front, but actually for their jobs, for their livelihoods, for their businesses. They are absolutely worried, and they don't believe that they're going to go back to level 1 after Friday night. So I'd like to have some clarity from the Prime Minister.
How much of this is politics, though? Last time we went into lockdown, the Prime Minister's ratings spiked. Are you mindful of that when making the decision on when we should have the election?
I don't think that people are that cynical. I think that New Zealanders expect a lot better than that. What is really important is that everybody last time we had the lockdown believed that we would be able to deal with this issue, that we would be able to stop it. We were told that we could stop it at the borders, we would have good quarantining. What people are now saying is they want some answers, but actually it is not politics to ask people, or on behalf of people, that they get some clarity, not only around their health, but also around whether or not they're going to have a job. I think this is a very important point. Asking questions is what the opposition does.
Last week...
Do you think that this has been an overreaction from the government? We have no cases, now we've got 4 cases, lockdown in Auckland. How would you characterise it?
Look, I'm not going to say that because we don't have the medical advice. We've been waiting all day for a briefing on the medical situation to Dr. Shane Retty. We haven't had it. All that I have is probably as much as what you've received from the government. And my view is if you've got, if you believe as a government that you have a situation of a community outbreak, when you've been telling people that you've got 102 days with no outbreak at all, no community transmission, you'd need to be asking yourself some pretty tough questions. So I think it is, certainly a serious reaction, but I think it's probably appropriate in the time. I don't know what else they could do other than to consult a bit better on it and let us have the details.
Mr Brownlee, you recently said, asked for the government to come forward on what they actually knew and calling for a level 2 in face masks. Do you think that this community, do you feel vindicated in that this community transmission has happened?
No, it's not a case of being vindicated. It's a case of having a look at what were some pretty obvious signs that were indicating growing concerns. What wasn't clear is what those concerns were about and why they were there. So, maybe at 4 o'clock today when there's another press conference, we'll get another little bit dribbled out that help us understand it. But to lock a whole 1.3 billion people down into level 3 for apparently only 3 days to see if they could track and trace everything, when we also do know that those people were tested twice to confirm that they had COVID-19, does seem to be leaving us still in a position of wondering what do the health authorities know that they're not fully explaining.
On this question of masks, a question to both of you. Have you been wearing masks and will you be wearing masks?
I've worn a mask for a little bit of time this morning. I haven't worn them up till now because the directive has not been that we must wear masks. And at the moment, if you're in Auckland, I know from family members that masks are very hard to get.
And as you know,
Sorry, would you mind? Sorry.
And as you know, having seen me wearing my mask, yes, I have been wearing my mask in transport and public transport as well.
Do you feel more relaxed?
Do you think that the government knew more than they were telling us?
I think it's very
Like running over the leg maybe.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry. Yes.
just trying to keep up.
To read the chart.
Look, I don't know. And that's the point, isn't it? Is that I believe that New Zealanders need to know what the government knew. If they didn't know anything else than what was advised last evening, then we should know that. And I simply don't have that transparency. That's one of the reasons that we want the briefing on the health issues to Dr. Shane Retty. We do need to know, as the public needs to know.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. I think that if it is just a plain health message, it should be delivered by the health officials. And what I've heard today is the Prime Minister delivering health messages. I don't think that is appropriate at the present time. That situation would change if we were further away from an election. But I think you've got to be very careful about how you use the airwaves in an environment where you have only a few weeks away from an election being cast. Can I make a comment about your question, Jenna? I just think it was interesting, and if you think about what was said, what we observed was, one is the messaging around a possible further outbreak of COVID-19 began a couple of weeks ago, or about 10 days ago in fact. On top of that, there was the issue of the masks. We were encouraged to start purchasing masks to have them available in the emergency kit, as it was put. Dr. Bloomfield went a little bit further. In one interview I saw him suggesting that people might wear a mask for 1 day a week just to get used to the idea of wearing masks. And then you had the Prime Minister's visit to the mask factory yesterday, along with, or Monday was it, along with Dr. Bloomfield, after 103 days of no community transmission, having a test himself. All very interesting things to have happened a matter of hours before there was a notification of the largest residential part of New Zealand going into level 3 lockdown.
So what are you saying there then? Can you just tell what are you saying there?
I'm just outlining facts.
But what do you mean by that? I mean, are you saying it's not a coincidence that they knew?
Well, why don't you ask some questions, I think? Yeah, media should ask their own questions. Hello, Jason.
Has National cancelled its campaign launch in South Auckland?
Well, we have to.
So it is cancelled?
Well, we can't possibly go ahead with a major event with a couple of thousand people when we are looking at, well, we are in level 3 lockdown in Auckland, and we have no guarantee what's going to happen on Friday evening. So we can't go ahead with that.
Ms. Giles, can I just get certainty on the election vote? The Electoral Commission says they can run an election, they can plan to run an election under level 2 restrictions. Do you support that?
I want a meeting with them about that, so I want to see what they're talking about, because certainly when I was Minister of Justice and I was their Minister, I would like to know, as I'm sure everyone else would like to know, whether this is a postal ballot. If it's a postal ballot, I will certainly not support that. It is an absolutely ridiculous way to go. Yes, Joe.
Auckland or any other part of the country ends up having to go up another level. How much notice would you expect the country to give about that, and who do you think should provide that message to the public?
Well, I think it's very important that these are decisions that need to be made, obviously, if that happens. I don't see any problem with the health officials because it is actually a decision on a health issue, making that decision. certainly this close to an election, it is, I think, very important, if it's made on health reasons, health grounds, that the experts in health are actually the people advising that.
But the health officials provide the advice. The government actually makes the decision.
Well, I think it's, normally people get about 48 hours, that's what we're used to, but I think it is also important that you give people as much reasonable time as possible so that they can arrange their affairs accordingly. That's pretty clear. Look, what we saw last night was, even though we have already been through, a level 4 lockdown for weeks, it was around 4 or 5 weeks, wasn't it, earlier this year, we saw panic buying in supermarkets. We saw some pretty appalling fear being manifested in the way it was. I think people do need to have a bit of notice, and I do think that people, wherever possible, need to be brought along on that journey.
But do you really think that an unelected official, the Director General of Health, should have enough power to lock down an entire country?
Well, that is actually the law, as I understand it. It's that is actually it's not supposed to be a political decision, is it?
Does the opposition still support, in broad terms, the government's elimination strategy when it comes to COVID-19?
Well, I certainly do, and our party does. I think it's very important that I have a zero tolerance to COVID-19. I don't want COVID-19 in this country, and I can't think of anybody who does. We're an isolated country. It shouldn't be that hard to keep it out if we have closed borders and we have good quarantining.
To go back to Jennings' point on that, so you would be comfortable with Dr. Ashley Bloomfield deciding to move the country up and down alert levels without any cabinet sign-off?
We said announcements.
But the person making the announcements, shouldn't they be the one who's accountable for their decisions?
You read the pandemic legislation.
Come to the thing. Sorry, we're just doing the social.
If you read the pandemic legislation and the emergency management legislation, it makes it abundantly clear that it is the recommendation of the Director General of Health. The Prime Minister said that over and over herself. And at a time like this, it would not be appropriate for a political system or a political decision to override his recommendations.
But we've also seen instances where the Prime Minister has overridden that decision, much to your favour, in that he was favouring 4 weeks in a previous lockdown, and the Cabinet, I think, was 1 or 2 weeks for business sake. So shouldn't there be some oversight from Cabinet to overrule advice in the instance of businesses to find a happy medium, in which case Cabinet is responsible for their decision, so they should be the ones accountable for it?
Well, in the end, if it's a health issue, take the advice of the health professionals. If it's an economic issue, deal with that separately.
But it all comes together, all the advice comes together, and they make a decision based on all of the different pieces of advice.
Yeah, okay. So you asked, is it appropriate for him to be announcing this in the current environment? Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's a pre-election. This is a pre-election period, and actually those pre-election conventions should be respected. So whether or not the Cabinet decided to take all of the advice provided, that doesn't matter in terms of who announces it. Dr. Ashley Bloomfield is the Director General of Health. He is the health expert, not anyone else in the government.
If you were given the opportunity to consult with the Prime Minister, as you were calling for today, what would have been your advice to her, and would it have differed much from what she ended up doing?
Well, how would I know? I haven't had the information. I think if I had the advice, I could possibly give you an answer, but it's very difficult to be consulted without the advice.
But the facts are that there was community transmission, and she's put New Zealand or Auckland into level 3. I mean, is
that the only facts that she had? Is that the only advice she had? I think it's important that we are very sensible of the fact that this is a health issue, a very serious health issue. Clearly, COVID-19, according to everything we've been told by the Prime Minister, is now in community transmission of that in this country, after we have been told that we've had no community transmission for 102 days. That has been celebrated in New Zealand. and now we have community transmission. There is also an economic issue, and that is around the fact that we now have businesses going into lockdown, some businesses having to close, people very, very concerned about their jobs and very concerned about their businesses. All of these issues are ones which we take very seriously, and it is important that we have the best transparent information. It is not acceptable a few weeks out from an election for there to be no transparency. As I've said, we've been waiting all day for the Dr. Shane Reti to be able to be briefed by officials and the minister or the minister or officials on this. It's a serious issue. Where's the transparency?
How much information were you given in your briefing last night?
Well, not a huge amount, actually. Not a huge amount, Jenna, of information in the briefing, but obviously some information, and there would be some that I think is best if I don't mention because of it could identify the people who are those who have now caught COVID-19. I don't want to identify them, and that's not up to me to do so, and I wouldn't wish to.
Did you leak any of that information?
To whom? Nobody, absolutely. Why would I leak it? What information?
Did you share it with anyone?
No, I did not, other than my deputy at the appropriate time, just before the press conference, that we let him know, and I did not tell him the information that I consider to be private. I've certainly told him that this is coming.
The Prime Minister seemed to indicate that it was quite a fulsome briefing that she gave you. Is
Right.
that not?
Okay, I've had much more full briefings from people before.
What other advice would you have expected at a briefing like that, sort of 3 or 4 hours after it had been?
Oh, come on. I think we'd need a bit better information around what is known, what could be known. The Prime Minister was able to tell me that they had no idea where this COVID-19 had come from, that they weren't able to trace anybody connected to the family who had been overseas. That sort of information, clearly she knew quite a bit beforehand. She said she knew at 4 o'clock that afternoon. I knew just before 9 o'clock, 8:45. So there has been, obviously that's the sort of information. In terms of, what's that? Well, what does consultation mean to you, Jenna?
Well, no, just what time did you expect to be told before 6, before the pay?
It's a matter of consultation is consultation, and I would have thought, and I'm not complaining about times, I am saying that is not consultation. That is advice, that is what decision has been made. It is important, and I have reiterated this again today, that we don't have the health information. We have not been privy to it. We believe that we should have the health information, and that is not what I've been given. I have been given very scant information. In fact, I've got even better information from media.
If the Electoral Commission was an independent and apolitical body were to recommend or say could do a postal ballot, why would you oppose that?
Because I know that New Zealanders would not accept a postal ballot as a valid form of democracy, exercising their democracy in one of the oldest democracies in the world, where we take voting very seriously. And even though we do not have compulsory voting, we still are noted as having some of the highest rates of voter participation. This is not something that should be left to a postal vote. We see this time and time again with our local council votes, where we are lucky to get a 38% turnout, and in the general election we get anything from about 68 to 84% turnout. And there is also two referenda in this particular vote. This is a serious issue. It is not a laughing issue. It is not something to joke around, and it's certainly not something to have just put in an envelope and sent off with no verification as to who anyone is. Well, if the government has, and the medical advice is that they have no certainty whatsoever over any ability to hold an election in November without a lockdown situation, then that would obviously be better. But it's not. It's a matter of knowing that we'd actually have systems in place to be able to cope with it. What we're seeing at the moment is very little transparency, and that is simply not good enough. The fact there's so little transparency can be seen by what I'm hastened to add looks awfully like panic from some people last night. Panic buying, panic behaviour that we should not be seeing in this country. if people felt that they had true and utter confidence in it. And even today we've been hearing about this at supermarkets. People are worried, and actually they need to know what is actually happening.
Do you think the government has?
No, I'm not saying that I don't know what they've done, because all I've seen is exactly what you've seen. I haven't probably had less information than what you've had.
Can I talk about the campaign? How frustrating is it to have to put the campaign on?
Oh, well, you're the campaign chair. Do you want to deal with that one?
Well, if you're in an environment where you're seeking to ask, or you're going out to ask voters to look at your program and to consider casting their vote for you, you need to be able to do that. And at the moment, for a lot of reasons, right across the country, we can't do that. And if that were to go on for any period of time, that would be make the whole idea of an open, free, unencumbered democratic election a nonsense.
It's also sort of frustrating that Auckland, how frustrating is it for you? You're going to give huge event to
Look, that's not a frustration. My frustration is we have plenty of policy, we're putting it out there, but also actually people want to know what they're buying when they vote for us, what it is that they're expected to get. It's very hard when we've got basically no ability to campaign, but also it's not just that. I mean, goodness sake, I've been through several campaigns over the years. It's not just that, it's the fact that people expect better. We are a first world liberal democracy where people expect to be able to cast their vote. And if we can't think of ways to do it properly, then we need to delay the election. And that's why I've tried to have a meeting today with the Electoral Commission. We've tried on numerous occasions today. We are apparently receiving a letter at some time. It may even be in my office now as we're speaking. And apparently we're going to have a meeting tomorrow. So let's see how they go. But if it's just a postal vote, no, that's not good enough.
Last one from... Yeah, good. Go next to you, Jenna. Last question. Okay. Yield to Jenna. Well, no more questions.
Yeah.
We're going around in circles.
Well, we're not worrying about that. It's a big event, and it doesn't matter that it's a big event. It's not that. It's the fact that we have an election. New Zealanders expect to have a vote, and they expect their vote to be cast in the usual manner or something extremely similar to it. They don't expect anything that makes them feel that this is not what they would expect in an election. Well, obviously the fact that we have no transparency from the government doesn't help, does it? We've got a situation at the moment where the government is not acting as a government during an election, the pre-election time, acting according to the conventions. We've had no briefing today. We've been asking for it all day for our health spokesperson. I would have thought that was a pretty obvious thing. We're not having that. I also don't believe for a moment that New Zealanders will, in fact, believe that a postal vote or anything like that is going to work. So that's why we want to get the information from the Electoral Commission. If they come up with some new idea that we think is going to work, well, we're happy to look at it. But I just don't think it is possible to have a fair election at the moment, only a few weeks out from election until the voting actually is due to start. Thank you.